Caleb Sima, Chief Security Officer at Robinhood. Robinhood is the company that focuses on democratizing finance for all as our mission. And we are primarily a mobile app, but we're also a web application that allows you to we're a brokerage, we're a crypto company, we're a payments company. So you can trade, buy, sell, and send in our company, on our app.
And CSO, Chief Security Officer, what are your marching orders? What is your mandate?
I had to do this presentation for our team kickoff, and I was like, what's the simplest way to explain sort of what we do, right? Because I think like everyone has these different things. Oh, we manage risk. Oh, we do these things. But when I was like, if I'm at a cocktail party and there's no one, and I'm talking to people who aren't technical, who don't know security, like what's the simplest way? And we try to stop the company from getting hacked. Like that's really the most simple explanation, right?
And stealing people's money. Yeah.
But then I was thinking about it. Well, that's actually not that simple, right? Because I mean, you can actually stop getting hacked by just not doing business. Like that's really the answer. I think the challenging part comes back is how do you stop the company from getting hacked while moving at the speed of the business? And that I think is the hard part. And so I very much sort of comedically drew a Venn diagram to explain this, where I had one circle that's don't get hacked, and then the other circle is move at the speed of the business, and then the overlap is really where all the work is done, right? And so what do we do? It's as chief security officer, and I think as a security team, our job is to help us to not get hacked while allowing the company to move at the speed of business, to take risks. Right. And that overlap is the hard stuff. And that's where our job is to increase that overlap between the two.
Yeah, and we're gonna talk about that a little later because I think that's a really interesting kind of observation. And we talk about you talk about the speed of business, but the speed of business is not actually a constant, right? It's accelerating, right?
We're not going 60 miles an hour; we're going 120 miles an hour.
And next year you might need to go 240 miles an hour, right? I mean, it's right. It's not like the speed of light or something, right? The speed of business changes.
I could also keep this analogy going by saying, depending on the stage of your company, you could be a broken down car trying to go 120 miles an hour, or you could be like a Ferrari going 120 miles an hour.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Yeah. You could try to be going 120 miles an hour with a blown head gasket.
That's right.
Yeah. So when we first met, which was early, I mean, I think really pretty soon after I came on the cybersecurity beat, you were the CTO and co-founder of Spy Dynamics, which was the first company you founded. It was sold to Hewlett Packard, HP. Talk a little bit about where the idea to start Spy Dynamics came from. This was a web application security company.
So I think I would say that the journey really started at this company called Internet Security Systems out of Atlanta, ISS. And it was founded by this guy named Chris Klaus.
Purchased by IBM eventually, yes.
Yeah, so IBM bought the company. Although I left ISS prior to that acquisition. But started by Chris Klaus because he created this, this scanner called Internet Security Scanner, and somehow turned it into a business, which back then was really very rare, right? Because we're talking 1994, 1995 kind of time frame. And so dedicated security companies were not like what you see at RSA today when you walk around the conference. And so I joined that company as a researcher in the X-Force, which is what it was called. Prior to their IPOs, it was a pretty small company. I was one of those guys that, sit in the office with the lights turned off, and then like they slid pizzas under the door while we like reverse engineered software and wrote exploits. Like that was my first job really at ISS. And so
guard of the guys in the hoodies at computer terminals and dark rooms. Those are actually pictures of Caleb when he was starting out.
And funny enough, I'm still wearing a hoodie even during this podcast. So that was sort of like the job. And then I remember one day they came to me and they said, "Hey, Caleb, we want to go start doing these tests against companies because our buyers, our customers are asking to test them to be able to prove that they need to buy our software, our products, right?" And so they're like, "Would you like to go do that?" And I was like, "Okay, sure." So I went out of this sort of dark room research mode into this, pen testing. But it wasn't called pen testing back then. That wasn't even, I think, a term. It was just basically called, "Caleb, go justify the purchase of our products," right? And so I would get pointed. A customer would say, "Okay, come test us," and then I would go and break in. And I started doing that so often that I got very good at it. But at that time, firewalls were kind of becoming the standard, and all these things were coming up.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time, and again, this was like, gosh, probably 96 or 95 or something. I went to a website, and their website just had an authentication form on it, right? Username and password box. And I was like, okay, like, what am I going to do with this? You try, brute force guessing some things. And then I just viewed the source code of the web page. And in the source of the code of the web page, there is comments in it that was a conversation between developers of the website talking inside the comments of the web page, talking about, oh, go here to change this. And they put a URL and they would do all these things. I was like, what in the world? And I copied the URL, and it dumped me into an admin little dashboard of that website. And that was the first time I was like, whoa, this is crazy.
I
I
think there's a
just,
security problem with web
I was
applicants.
like, really? Um, and I just started going down that road. Every single company I went to, I started just looking at the web stuff, because this is when web was first started really coming out, becoming a business thing.
Yeah.
And I just started breaking into everything through websites. And I
Yeah.
think that started this momentum of, hey, oh my gosh, there's a real problem here that
Right.
no one talks about. Yeah.
Um,
eBay was getting really popular, right?
mhm.
Like, all of these things were all like, people were starting to say, okay, this is how business is, when you start
Right.
moving to the web, right?
And I anticipate that the answer to this question is going to be really depressing, but what were some of the security issues that you found back then, Caleb?
Obviously, I'll talk about names, but I mean, it went from everything. I mean, at the time, and I don't know if you remember this, but yeah, obviously SQL injection is sort of a known
Yeah.
thing today, but back then it was not even termed SQL
Number one
injection,
on the
right?
OWASP, I think. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
And so when I was doing this, I sort of stumbled upon SQL injection by accident, and was using SQL injection until I had stumbled upon RFP, or Rainforest Puppy, uh, actually posting about SQL injection, not calling it that. And at the time frame, it was difficult to find a company or a application that was not vulnerable to it. So that was really, really interesting. I wrote a Google script, an automated script that would basically rotate through as many Google results as I could,
Right.
and automatically put in the single tick, and like 95% of the results at that
Yeah.
time would always flag it. It was crazy. So basically, anything you can think of during that time I was at ISS, I broke into. You name it. So
Yeah. There was
bank
no security. Yeah.
not through the web. It was
Yeah.
just completely wide open. So
So
yeah,
at what point did you sort of did the idea for Spy Dynamics come into your head and you said,
yeah.
actually, I think we can make a business out of this?
So as any good lazy person, and I am a lazy person, does, you automate all of the things you do. So I had written this script because I was doing the same stuff over and over again, crawling websites, injecting bad parameters, doing things, looking for directories. So I just kind of automated that all up. And I remember I was at a customer site and I was doing an assessment, and the person was sitting next to me. At the time, we didn't really have CISOs, but he was the person in charge of security. And I was running this thing, and he was watching me do this, and he was like, "What is that?" And I was like, "Oh, this is just my script that automates all the web stuff that I do." And he was like, "Can you give that to me?" And I was like, I don't know. It's just my stuff. And he was like, I'll buy it from you. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah. He was like, how much, how much would you sell it to me for? And I was like, I don't know, 20K. And he's like, okay, done. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah, just like zip it up and then
Yeah.
like send it to me. I was like, okay. And so I did that. I got like,
Hmm.
I was like, this is interesting. And I started like talking to others, right? So I started talking to other people and they were like, oh yeah, I would totally pay for that. And I was like, wow, this is maybe a thing. And so I went to the at the
The
time the
signs you're in the
founder.
early days of the
Yeah.
security industry. Like, well, how
Yeah.
do you know that you had an idea? It's like, people were literally like pushing money into my hands to
Yeah.
get what I had. That was
I,
the sign. Like,
that was
oh,
the side. I was like, well,
yeah,
this is something, right?
don't need a
And
deck.
you don't need any of that. And it was, because bootstrapped. Like actually,
Yeah,
Spy was mostly bootstrapped. But by the way, not by choice. We tried to go raise capital at tons and tons of places, and they were all like, "Who's this 19-year-old kid?" And talking this web stuff. Like nobody got it. Nobody understood. And so like it was a really really fascinating journey uh, on doing this. And I remember I was so frustrated by not being able to raise capital because nobody understood it. So I said, okay, from this point forward, in the next meeting, I'm going to basically break into something. And so in the next meeting, in the next capital, I was like, they were like, we don't understand. I was like, let me just show you. And so I brought up a company and I broke into it via the website. And they were like, oh, you shouldn't be able to do that. I'm like, exactly.
right.
And they were like,
No,
okay,
yeah,
we could probably put some money in, and it worked.
yeah, yeah.
By the way, like when I break into something, it's not like a real website that was like there. They were like, oh, I get it now that I see what you're doing.
Right.
I can see how this is done. So
Yeah, it's like it's so funny. It's like unless you were there, like it's hard to get people to understand how clueless and wide open everything was, even as early as the early 2000s, right? When obviously there were a lot of companies investing
yeah,
very heavily in this technology.
yeah,
But I remember, getting briefed by you and talking, with Spy Dynamics and some of your competitors as well. And it was still a challenge for you to convince companies that this was technology that they needed to invest in, that the downside risk for them was substantial enough to warrant the investment. I mean, that was not a
yeah.
no-brainer conversation.
And it took, we were creating a new market, right? And we had
Right.
to educate
Yeah.
that market, and
Right.
it took a lot of work, a lot of time. Um, I remember like one of our claims to fame is that we got web security into PCI, and people will either hate me or love me for that. But the fact that I feel like I've helped change the industry by getting something like that into a standard,
Yes.
right?
The face that launched 1,000 consultants, Caleb.
And made a lot of people a lot of money, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But it's and now when you look at the industry today, obviously almost everything is web, right?
Yeah.
Everything is application based, and like
Yeah.
I knew that was going to be the case, right?
Yeah. You saw that
And
coming.
yeah, and it's amazing to see actually today how advanced people have gotten in terms of how they do things. And like I look at some of the things that my team does at Robinhood, and it just blows my mind in terms of how our red team works and the ways that they are able to navigate and think. Or you just look at bug bounties and how the level of sort of complexity that they put together to bypass things is absolutely amazing.
You were saying that you were talking with one of your colleagues, and like they didn't know that you were actually like an application security like OG, and
Yeah.
like somebody had to like enlighten
Yeah.
them.
So my head of product security at Robinhood, um, he messaged me. This was maybe like a month or two ago, and he goes, I had no idea you knew about application security. And And my response to him was, see, this shows what a good leader I am. I'm not micromanaging you at all.
That is
Right.
true. Yeah. Yeah, you're not like trotting out your actually very impressive, track record and talking about your exits and all the other crap. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't talk a lot about what I do. The one thing I don't do is I don't go to my ProdSec team and say, I know a lot about AppSec and here's what you're going to go do. Because
Yeah.
actually, I don't anymore, right? Like when
Yeah.
you think about where those things are today, my level of knowledge is so old. So, but
That's
I
really
can
interesting.
claim I helped change an industry, I think. And I think that's really awesome
No
to be able
question.
to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after you did Spy Dynamics, the next two positions you had were actually CEO positions at Armorize and what was it, Blue Box,
Blue Box. Yep.
and both acquired, right? And now you are a CSO. So you've kind of done the tour of the C-suite, basically. CTO, CEO, CSO.
Yeah.
CMO maybe is in your future. I don't know, but
Uh, that, that would be an interesting one. Not on my plan. not on my list of things to go
I was
do.
joking. That and kind of what you got out of each of those positions, and whether which of them Caleb is happiest being.
Oh, that's a great question. So those are two questions. So first, I'll talk about a
Yeah.
little bit how those sort of things came to be, and then we'll talk about the happiest. I would say that how it came to be was obviously as I was moving up in my career, I was looking and I had more and more ideas. Right, like once you've done, a lot of people say once you've been an entrepreneur, it's in your blood, and you become a builder. And that's just what you want to do. You look at the world the way it should be versus the way it is. And everything that drives me is how do I get the world to be the way that I see it? And that is sort of the entrepreneurial spirit. And so both with Armorize, with Blue Box, there were things that I wanted to go do in areas I wanted to go build to be able to go do that. And CEO sort of came as a natural position into those roads because I just started saying, here's what I want to go do. Here's how I'm going to go do it. And it just started rolling that way. Now, the real interesting juncture, I think, is how did I go from sort of CEO and founders on the entrepreneurial path, which is most of my life, right,
Hmm.
is in that path, to this, oh, I went to go be basically sort of a soldier at Capital One, defending an organization, moving to a large company and
Yep.
basically just having many, many layers of bosses. Like, how did that happen? I think that's what most people sort of ask is why make that switch? And what happened, I think, after Blue Box was um, I really wanted to go build something like what I was building in the sort of the last two companies were things that were really interesting but niche in their sense,
Hmm.
right? And I wanted to go solve like a really big problem that really mattered. And so when I thinking about what really matters, and I started looking at the market, the cybersecurity industry, there's all of these great cybersecurity startups doing almost everything you can think of, right? Um, Yet when you go look at the actual news of breaches and what occurs in actual breaches, they're all because of fundamental problems like patching, databases just being open on the internet. Like these aren't hard
Authentication. Yeah. Yeah.
authentication. These
Yeah.
aren't hard problems, right? Like
Right.
or quote unquote you think, "Oh, why like we have technology to solve this. Why are we getting popped by these issues?"
Right.
And so I was like, "Okay, I could go do what I used to do, which I go talk to CISOs and say, hey, what is your problems? And go figure out how to go build something to solve that." But I was like, I've been in security my entire life. I mean, since I've been like 16. But I've never defended a company, right? Never been in sort of
The trend.
trenches, the battleground, right? Like when you're a vendor, it's sort of like you're making weapons, but in reality, you're never in the battleground using them. And so I was
Hmm.
like, let's just go do it. And so
Hmm.
I took a step back and said, I'm just going to go be an operator and go figure it out. And so I went to Capital One
Yep.
on the goals of saying, let's go figure out what the real problems are and why these problems exist. And again, if I can think of the way the world should be, then I'm going to have a whole list of startups that are ways that I want to go solve the problems that I learned. So when I went to Capital One, I actually learned I really enjoy this. like being in the battlefield is pretty amazing, right? Like you are in the action, you're dealing with the stuff every day, and it's crazy. Like the amount of things that you've got to deal with and the things you've got to learn and understand. And it really enlightened me a lot. Like when I used to think back when I was a vendor and building startups, like the fact that I didn't know this side of the house baffles me, right? Because now that I know this side of the house, things are so much clearer.
What kind of came into focus for you?
I think that when you think about sort of building things, you think about again just sort of, well, hey, here's this problem that I can go create and
Mm,
solve for. When in reality, when you look at the biggest problems, I think in an organization, it's not about these niche sort of problem sets in
yeah.
these areas. We are still today struggling with the basic fundamentals of an organization. Like patching is still a problem in every single organization. It's
Mm-hmm.
still like, and I remember
Mm-hmm.
like just when I walked into Capital One, my first question was, hey, I was like, what do we own? What sort of things do we have? And the fact that no one at the time could really answer that was like, what? Really? You kind of have this, really? Is that really a problem? And so it's like these fundamentals that every org has, right? And like
IT
anyone who's
asset
listening,
management was born.
yeah. Well, I mean, and IT asset management was like dealing with like hardware, like
Yeah.
laptops and chairs and
Yeah.
tables. But
Yeah.
then you ask, well, hey, how many root users do we have in our company?
Yeah.
Who's going to go answer that for me? Like all the listeners of this right now can't go pull that number is going to be my bet.
Nope.
Right? And so it's like really simple fundamental
Not unless
things
they're
that
sole
we struggle with.
proprietorships, which in which case maybe they can.
Like Paul as a standalone LLC. I have one root user on my laptop.
I can
Yeah.
get you that information if you need it.
So it's just that. It's just like what's enlightening and what's clarifying is like,
Yeah.
it's the basic problems is still the things that we deal with. And what happens is technology moves quickly and we just don't learn. So the same basic problems that you have in a technology of yesterday then reiterates itself as the same problem, but in a different technology stack tomorrow.
Right. Right.
Right. And our jobs are effectively, well, I just tried to solve it here, but I'm moving at the speed of business. I need to now go solve it here.
Right.
And it just becomes this ever increasing pattern, right, of this
Yeah.
happening. So
Yeah, I mean, one thing that you hear a lot too is just that compliance, while useful, can also be, drain attention, time, resources from actually productive security. I mean, you were at Capital One, obviously highly regulated industry. Did you have that experience? Did you feel like we're spending way too much of our time on compliance, not enough time on doing stuff that matters?
I have a little bit of a different view on this. I actually truly believe that compliance and regulations are really doing and pushing for the right things. Right? When you look at what they're doing, they are asking the right questions. Of course, some of them can be behind the times, right? Again, moving at the speed of business is hard to do. But
Mm-hmm.
compliance is really trying to do the right thing. Regulations are trying to do the right thing. They're looking at it through the lens of how do I look at you and have you verify that you're doing the right thing? And that's a hard question to answer, right? I think where the struggle happens is when if you're a CISO or you're driving a security organization based solely on compliance or regulation, then that's when you need to rethink how you're doing that. Like, let me give you an example. To me, compliance and regulation is a translation, right? So like if you do the fundamentals well, which what compliance is trying to do is say, hey, are you doing the fundamentals well? Right? It's you have to tell them and verify that. But if you do the fundamentals well, then it doesn't matter who is or what organization is trying to ask you and verify you're doing it's then translation. It's like, okay, I've done the base fundamentals really well, and now I just need to translate it to all the different compliances that need to understand that. And so if you focus on doing the fundamentals, if you focus on actually doing the right level of risk management in your organization, then compliance should be able to be done easier, right? Because then you're just translating what you've done to all the different ways that they need to hear it so that they
Right.
can then verify it. I think if you
Right.
do it the opposite way, which it says, one compliance comes down and says, you need to do it this way, and this way. And that's where you start building it. Then when the next one comes, then it's a whole different way. And then you're just like basically spot thing everywhere. Right. And that's
Right.
very, very difficult versus just saying,
Stamping out fires, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
like they're all just trying to verify that you are doing the right things fundamentally well.
Mm.
And you just go for that and then translate it for them later.
So, I mean, as you mentioned, Robinhood is a B2C platform. You're a mobile and web-based stock trading platform, and you've talked a lot when we've talked personally just about the need to improve kind of the customer experience of security, and really make it sort of consumer friendly in some ways, user friendly in a way that often it isn't. Most of the companies you've been at to date have been, enterprise focused, right?
Hmm.
So kind of talk about that, what you mean by that, and how having maybe more of a customer centric or consumer centric approach would change the way companies think about how they do security.
I mean, my inspiration has always been Apple's iPhone. When I think about security and privacy done well, the iPhone is a fantastic example of this.
Yeah.
Um, we use an iPhone every single day to get what we want done, from whether it's editing a work document to taking a photo of yourself, right? And you don't think about the security and privacy that Apple's iPhone comes with. But what it does come with is extraordinarily advanced, right?
Mhm.
All the way through the entire stack from hardware to you, security, privacy is built into every single layer of that phone.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's very complex. And so that to me is the way that we should be going, is how do we make it so simple and so easy? So like, for example, coming into Robinhood, one of the things that is really, I think, very, very useful is this passwordless movement, right? Where you look at an Apple iPhone, we went from having to put in PIN codes, passcodes, to Touch ID, to Face ID, and not only is it becoming easier, but the actual verification is becoming better, right?
Yeah.
And it's becoming more secure. And so one of the goals I wanted coming into Robinhood was, how can we do that for our customers? Passwordless is the one thing that you can actually, one, make a better user experience for customers,
Yeah.
and two, more secure. And that is a win-win across the board, right? And so one of the things I am proud of is that when iOS came out with Passkey, on day one, Robinhood was there. We had the ability to do passkey and passwordless inside of our app right off the gate, and we worked really hard during that year to make sure that that was there. Now we're
So
not quite done, but
yeah.
we're doing really, really good things there.
So for folks who haven't used Passkey yet, or one of the other technologies that uses the same kind of underlying technology, how is it different? What does it do? And from an implementation standpoint, what's involved in switching from, maybe traditional password plus 2FA to.
The simplest way to say it is, people are familiar with hardware keys, right? You've got this YubiKey,
Yeah.
or hardware keys that people plug in and use in order to be the most secure. In passkey is embedding that key into your device, and that's fantastic. And so now it means you don't have to carry around this extra key. You actually have it built into your mobile device or to your iPhone, and you can then just use and authenticate to these applications like Robinhood using that hardware device in the right way. And that becomes super, super easy. And in Robinhood, all you have to do is go to your security settings and you can choose passkey, and then that enables it for you. It is hardware based. So using WebAuthn, you've got a chip inside of the device that allows you to basically do the right authentication to say, I know this is the device. And like, how does a user experience it? Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
So if you were to, let's say, log in or delete the Robinhood app, log in and reinstall and log in as your user and as an upgrade, you can just choose, oh, hey, I want to use passkey, And on fresh install, it would say, great, it will recognize it, log you right into your account. No password needed,
Nice.
which
Yeah.
is really nice. So,
Yeah.
and I think that,
Um,
again, gives you great user experience with great safety.
yeah. Because I mean, how many breaches, how many both kind of low end. I mean, forget about kind of the consumer space, but even the enterprise space really resolve to leaked, stolen credentials, right? Whether those are remote desktop credentials, VPN credentials, what have you, um, that
That's right.
developer accounts. I mean, this is just such a core problem. Having still relying on passwords
And
for.
I'm very excited that we will we will have a time that we will get there, because passwords have to die.
Password. I agree. One of the things that's really accelerating the speed of business is DevOps and agile development. Supply chain security is a really big topic right now. What's your take on it? Is this just kind of the latest kind of fad in the information security space, or is it really where the problem and the attacks are going?
I think that there's sort of a short term and a long term answer to this, right? I think that short term, no, this is not a problem that I think most people should be worried about. I think that there are unique cases around where that should be worried about. But, like, for example, I'm not going through every single piece of our software and every dependency to determine if someone is embedding a backdoor in that dependency because some open source contributor was malicious, right? Like, trying to go track and trace that down is a real waste of time at the current time frame. What do I do instead? I assume that they're already in that code base, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then what happens is you have to ask the question, okay, if my software does have a malicious embedded library, what are they going to do with it? Right, is the question to ask. And so if you deploy malicious software onto your production endpoints, they're going to have to use it in some way. At some point, they're going to have to say, well, what am I going to go do with this? And that means they're going to have to break out of that software and or figure out how to exploit your production servers in order to go do that. So the where I'm putting my energy is
Right.
making the assumption it's already malicious. And
Right.
so when we look at our production stuff, we say, if this was malicious, what are these people going to go do? And
Right.
spend our time focusing on those things, as a well, what's sort of the blast radius? How do you retain? How do you contain them? How do you
Right.
respond? Those are the things we want to spend our time and effort on right now. However, long term, I do think that there's importance in this understanding where software comes from and the validity of the software and the reliability, and the security of that software, I think is a great long-term challenge, but I don't see this being solved anytime soon.
Caleb Sima, CSO at Robinhood, thank you so much for coming in and speaking to us on the Security Ledger podcast. We'll have to do this again.
Okay. It was fun. Thanks, Paul.